Good evening, friends, and welcome to this edition of the Hamilton Report. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, your host and the executive director of the Democratic Party here in Oklahoma. And I'm always grateful to have this time to spend with you on Monday evenings. Our goal, as you know, is to inform and sometimes entertain. Our guests are so incredibly full of information that I learn something with each one. And I truly am grateful for all of the guests that we've had on in nearly this full year since we've been broadcasting this program. Want to mention a couple of things before we jump right in with our guest this evening. One is that the Stonewall Federation of the Oklahoma State Democratic Party met this weekend, elected officers, and I want to congratulate all of them and all of those who participated. It's exciting to see new leadership. The Disability Federation will have its convention on the 5th of June. More information is on our website about that. And then, of course, our state convention comes up on the 12th of June. It will be available for everyone to watch. We're doing an all electronic convention this year. When we started to plan, we had no idea where we would be as a society. And I know that still a lot of folks are not comfortable being in large groups together. So I'm glad we're doing it this way because it will allow us to have a fair election and a good state convention, and at the same time allow everyone in the state or anywhere else that wants to watch to do so. We'll be providing more information on that, but it will be available on Facebook at the Oklahoma Democratic Party page, as well as on our YouTube page. So be watching for that information, and you can get all of the details on everything we're doing at okdemocrats.org. My guest this evening is someone who I have been watching with a great deal of interest lately. He's quite in demand as a guest on programs such as this because of the work that he's doing. He is the founder and executive director of Let's Fix This. It's my pleasure to welcome to the Hamilton Report, Andy Moore. Andy, good evening.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted that you're here. I want to take a look at the mission of your organization, and I love the way that you posited it as, a formal mission statement, but then you say, wait a minute, there's so much more. This is really what we do to make politics more interesting, accessible, useful, and easier to understand for regular, everyday people. Some might even say we make politics cool. We just want to make it better. And I think that's a terrific mission to have for an organization. I know a lot of the work that you do is work to bring folks from different parties together, working in hand in hand. So let's talk a little bit about redistricting in Oklahoma. I know that term gets floated a lot, but I'm not sure how much we all really know about the impact that it potentially has on the way we are represented at the state capitol.
Sure, yeah. So I think there's two key words to start with. One is reapportionment, and the other is redistricting. Reapportionment is the distribution of congressional seats throughout the country, right? How many congressional seats each state gets in Congress. And then redistricting is the drawing of lines there in each state. So while some states use their state legislature to redraw the lines, other states use some sort of independent commission or board to draw the lines. Here in Oklahoma, we have always used the state legislature, and we hope that's not always the case.
I thought it was really interesting, Andy. Last week, our chair made a good point. She said instead of people electing politicians, the politicians are looking at who they want to be the people voting for them. And how can you possibly keep it fair for the people of Oklahoma when this kind of thing happens completely out of their control?
Right. Yeah. So, I have long said that redistricting should be about the people. It should be about who lives in the state, not just the politicians who may happen to live in a particular district that they represent when the lines get drawn every 10 years. And that's an important thing to remember, is that redistricting only happens once a decade. Typically, it is done, I guess always it's done, using the data from the most recent census. So last year in 2020, in years that end in 0, we have the census. And then in years that end in 1, the next year, we do redistricting. And this year, we had hoped to have an independent commission in place here in Oklahoma, but our ballot initiative that we were running the last couple of years, hit a big snag. That was the COVID pandemic, and so we weren't allowed to collect signatures in time to get it on the ballot, and that leaves the job of redistricting firmly in the hands of the state legislature. And we know that, as has been the case in state history almost since the beginning, one party or the other has a significant majority, and that means they really have the power to draw the lines however they'd like.
Now, so if I'm in a district and I have a really good relationship with my representative, and there's someone that I work to get elected, and there's someone whose work I appreciate at the Capitol, and then I wake up and I see this new map, and all of a sudden I'm in someone else's district. How does that happen? I mean, I know how it happens, and I know that it's legal, but it just smells wrong to me.
Sure. And so I'll kind of explain it a little bit, because I think this can be one of those things that turns people off or smells wrong, but is based in a really good piece of democracy. So the purpose of redistricting is to ensure that everybody's vote counts equally. One person, one vote is the standard that we try to uphold. And in order to do that, we have to draw districts of each chamber to have the same number of people. So all of the state Senate districts have the same number of people. All of the state House districts have the same number of people. And our 5 congressional districts have the same number of people. And in order to draw those lines, people move, people are born, people die, things change over a 10-year period. And so every 10 years after the census, we have this grand reset where we have to redraw the lines to ensure that population is equalized. And it's, as an example, over the past 10 years, from 2011 to 2020, the population of Oklahoma County itself increased by roughly 80,000 people. Well, that's almost an entire state Senate district that has to be added into Oklahoma County. And then you also see, a corresponding decrease in other districts or other counties around the state. Oklahoma as a whole, it grew by about 6% over the last 10 years. But that growth was not equally distributed across the state, right? Places like Weatherford didn't grow at the same rate as Oklahoma City or Tulsa. And so we have this trend that we've seen over decades of more people living in urban and suburban areas and fewer folks living in some of the rural areas. And because of that, as those lines shift in order to make sure that everyone's vote counts equally, sometimes, you may live in one district for 10 years, and then that line moves because you have to ensure that everyone's vote counts equally. That doesn't mean that you are not represented, though. You still have a vote, and your voice still matters.
I'm glad you explained it that way, because that starts to make some sense now when you consider that people do move. And I know that in this census data that's out now, a number of our rural counties lost population in this 10-year period. And as you said, there's been growth in Oklahoma County and Tulsa County, Cleveland County. But so that wouldn't necessarily change things. And that's starting to become clearer. And I appreciate you spelling that out more specifically. Tell us what your organization, Let's Fix This, how do you engage people in the political process? What do you do to show folks that politics can be fascinating, actually? And how do you snag them in, and how do you keep them involved?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'll kind of answer by telling you how we got started. And that's 5 years ago. I was just a guy who had a passing interest in politics at best. I listened to NPR on my morning commute and was kind of aware of things But I was working at the university and in a program that was federally funded. It was a healthcare program. And that meant I had to pay somewhat close attention to what was happening at the federal level with politics, with government, with funding, so that we could be responsive and kind of anticipate changes that might be coming down to us. And then I started hearing from my colleagues who worked at state agencies like the health department and DHS about challenges they were facing at the state level with funding. And I started reading the news and was shocked to see that at the time, the state of Oklahoma was facing a $1.3 billion shortfall. And I thought, how can this be? How did we get here? Like, surely there's got to be a way that we can dig us out of this hole. So as I learned more and more about honestly, the poor policy decisions that led to that budget shortfall and the implications it was having for our ability as a state to respond to, for my program as an HIV and AIDS program. So how we responded to the HIV epidemic that's been, the scourge of our country for more than 40 years now, and other programs. I started to really connect the dots and understand that, while most of us don't like politics, that feels like a dirty word, but we understand that government can be good and necessary and can be a force for good and can be very helpful in doing things in a broad way. And suddenly, these politics that happened are influencing or affecting how our government functions. And we've been asleep at the wheel, right? And many of us, and myself included, were voters who had been somewhat tuned out or apathetic. And as I saw this problem before our state, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe these guys at the state legislature don't know how to fix it. Maybe they're as stumped and as shocked as I am at hearing this news. And, I started doing some research and found that there were a number of options, right? The Oklahoma Policy Institute had several white papers out kind of outlining all of the ways and tools we had to fix that budget shortfall. And I thought, okay, well, we've all grown up hearing that we're supposed to, write to our elected officials and send them emails or call them. And I had never done that. And I thought, okay, well, if there's ever a chance to start, now's the time. And so I, organized a group of folks to go to the Capitol and just to meet our elected officials and have a conversation with them about the state budget and find out, how do you feel about these things? What are your thoughts on how to fix it? Here are some thoughts I have and some things that I support, and I want you to know that I support them. Because, as they often say in the West Wing, decisions are made by those who show up. And if we're not showing up, somebody else probably is, and they may have a very different opinion of what matters than we do. And so from that first event, I thought I would have 6 or 8 of my friends come, and we had over 100 people. And then a few weeks later, we did it again and had, 200 people, and then we had 500 people. And I kept hearing from folks, this is great. You make it so easy. This is what I've been looking for. I wanted to be involved. I just don't know how. And, I made a video about how to enter the Capitol, just how to walk from the parking lot to the door. And it was one of our, most viewed videos. And that told me then, right, if people don't even know how to get inside the building, we're expecting way too much for them to just magically know how to advocate for issues and things that they care about. And so we've tried to start there at the very basic level of meeting people where they're at, finding out what they care about, and then helping, coach or encourage them along the way to build those relationships with elected officials at the city, county, state, and national level, and help them use their voice to be a positive influence in our world.
That's so incredible, because that's what it takes. Someone's passion, whatever that might be, to spark a fire. You mentioned HIV and AIDS. And I think, 40 years ago, people who absolutely would never have thought of themselves as being involved in politics, all of a sudden became some of the greatest spokespersons in history, because they were making demands of politicians, and without any training, they were just so passionate that something had to be done. And so then I was thinking about that as you were talking about getting people together to even find out how to come into the Capitol. and it is a daunting process. I was there last week, and if you know exactly which door to go in, you're okay. But you can't bring balloons in the Capitol. Who knew? So there are things that I think could be really intimidating. So I applaud the fact that you are working to get people more comfortable with the idea of approaching the Capitol. And one of the things that we all have to remember is that our elected representatives, no matter which party they might focus on, are people just like us. And so they have an understanding of where we're coming from. And if we can amplify that, then so much the better. But you mentioned 500 people. Well, obviously, 500 people are not going to be all excited by the same things. Some people would be excited by the budget. Other people would be totally turned off by even having to think about those numbers. So how do you help people understand where their passion lies and how to plug that into the process?
Yeah, I really just start by asking people how they feel about government, how they feel about politics, and what things they think matter to them. Just that they think that the government has an impact on, right? Most of us kind of know roads and schools and a few things, but most of us also are aware of some way that that we have interfaced with the government at some point, right? Like right now, I have a bunch of friends trying to get their driver's license renewed, and it's a huge debacle, right? So that's a pain point right now. And saying, okay, well, let's find out exactly who was responsible for that, right? Because you can tweet at Governor Stitt all day, but he's not the one that's actually doing that. There's someone way down the chain who is responsible for overseeing and managing and implementing that. And there are lots of ways for us to be connected that aren't just aimed at those kind of most visible politicians that we normally think of. And so just really, I think, taking the time to listen and talk to one another. And, Scott, I think that's something that we've lost a lot of in our society over the last, 50 years, is that, I guess more than that, probably 70 years, right? That we don't know our neighbors the way that we used to. And we all acknowledge that, but what are we really doing to fix that? And that's one of the things that we've tried to enhance over the last 5 years, and that we're going to be doing a lot more of, is really trying to do some community building in the community, because you may talk to your neighbor that lives 2 doors down and you may wave at them in the summertime, but do you know what they care about? And it doesn't do any good for us to take our rage out online when there is so many more people who live right around us, our friends, our family, our neighbors, our coworkers, that we could invest just a little bit of time and effort into to find out about them and start building that relationship. And that can translate into a lot of power, I think, into making that positive change we want to see.
Andy, I absolutely love that. And I've been thinking a lot about, over the last 4 years, how public discourse just was shut down in many ways. The negative attacks that saw no relief. And then on top of that, then we have a pandemic that keeps us all sequestered away from each other. And so a lot of people just got really used to blowing up on social media, and I think that it is time for us to re-examine how we communicate as a community, as a family, because chances are good that someone in your family has some of the same issues that you care about. So that's really a positive step forward. Let me ask you, how do you engage people in the very first place? Do people come to you? Do you reach out to groups? How do you effectively get people involved and keep them involved?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for every organization. We're not alone in that. I started by creating a Facebook event, and I was going to invite a few friends, and I thought, why not invite everybody that lives in Oklahoma? All of my friends on Facebook that lived in Oklahoma, hoping honestly that I would get, 6 or 8 of them to show up. And as a few of them replied, and they invited their friends, and then they invited their friends, and suddenly it's a pyramid scheme for good, right? Like that you can get 10 of your friends to sign on, that we can really get people to do it. And they started, tagging each other and saying, hey, this is the thing I was telling you about, or look, this is what we've been talking about wanting to do. I think, your point about the pandemic is exactly right. We as a society are hungry and longing for relationships and for some kind of connection that is real and authentic. And it's difficult, right? Like the world feels at times gross and ugly and cold. And it can be for lots of people. And, from a political standpoint, I think that there is a huge opportunity for a political party to step in and to demonstrate to the public that they care about them and to show it, right? It's easy to put up commercials and warm and fuzzy tweets about stuff, but whichever party gets there first and is out there knocking doors, having conversations, taking the time to invest in the public and to put their words into action, is going to come out on top. I think we see some pieces of that with COVID response, right? And how the rhetoric has changed. But I'll be honest, there has been I guess a bit of a cultural war waging for the last few decades. And the Democrats have not shown up in the way that matters for enough people, right? And we see this in Oklahoma and across the state, where people are leaving the party and leaving both parties and saying, I'm sick of these parties. I'm just going to be an independent. And that often means I'm checking out of the process entirely. And that just leaves, the most vocal minorities on both ends that are out there screaming into the void. And so I kind of urge all of the viewers, right, to pause and think about what it is that we post on social media and why. Who are we hoping reads this? What is the impact or the end outcome that we're hoping for? There's a good chance you're not influencing anybody with our social media post. I'm not saying don't post it, but I'm saying maybe ask more questions than you say things, and take some time to build those relationships in real life. And it can be something as simple as the kindness you show to the grocery store clerk that's ringing you up when you buy your groceries. It's how you treat the guy that's changing the oil in your car. It's how you treat the folks that are mowing your lawn and the people that are walking down the street. And the people that you don't like, right? Like, there's a lot that we can all do to really, and not to be cliche, but to be the change that we want to see in the world. And I think the more that we do that and we embody that authenticity and that realness, and to truly form relationships, not for the sake of winning an election, but for the sake of turning America around, I think we're going to be all right.
Andy, that it was so beautifully put, and I really appreciate that, because I heard a sermon yesterday about living faith, and how everything in our lives should reflect our faith, and I think that it's true with our values, certainly as well, because as Democrats we have values that we hold dear, and if we present those in everything we do. I think that, I know for me, you just convicted me when you said that. It will make me a little slower to hit the enter button when I write something, particularly on social media. Let me think about it for a minute, because that's really good advice. We're going to be running out of time in a minute, but finally, what would you say to someone, Andy, who's never been involved in politics, and it's just not anti-involvement, but just kind of ambivalent? How would you push them over the line to say this is important work for you, for your family?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that I struggle with the most. If I'm going to be authentic and transparent, right? The guy that cuts my hair sometimes, he said he's never voted, and I said, really, why not? He said, can you honestly tell me that my vote matters? And I just had that pit in my stomach of like, oof, that's a tough one. Now I can tell you that if you don't vote, it for sure doesn't count, right? Then it doesn't matter if you don't show up. And the likelihood is, right? It's not likely, it is definite that for every person out there who feels that way, there are tens of thousands of others who don't, right? I was just looking at campaign or election results a little while ago, and to see the number of state legislative races that are decided by just a few thousand votes, right? Kendra Horn lost her race by like 13,000 votes, less than 1%, a tiny portion. And that means it's just a bunch of folks making the decision to show up when it matters. Decisions are made by those who show up. I'll say it again and again, and that if you don't show up, you don't get a voice in that. Now, I'm just one guy. I honestly had never been to the state capitol before 5 years ago, and then I just started showing up. And it didn't take long at all to, just say hello and to meet people, so that people started recognizing you as someone who came around every now and then. And they go, oh, okay, well, who are you? And I'm like, I'm just a guy. I happen to live in your district, and here's what I care about. And it went from being a total stranger to someone that had name recognition. And by that little bit of a relationship, you have a little bit of influence. And the key to this, right, is that honestly, so few people do it. And so if you want to be directly involved with elected officials, just put one foot in front of the other and do it. I promise you, you can make a difference. You may not change the world in 1 year, but you can have a positive influence. And then the second thing is, right, again, just finding ways to connect with your neighbors. And I think it ends up being almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a positive feedback loop, where the more energy you put into it, the more energy you get out of it. And I think when we start investing in one another and in our community, then our community will invest in us, and we'll get Oklahoma to the place we want it to be.
Andy, I love your attitude. I love the work that you're doing. And I'm going to ask that you come back and see us again and keep us posted on your work. And I'm looking forward not just to following you in the months and years to come, but also to working hand in hand with you. It's great to visit with you this evening, and please do come back and see us, okay?
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Andy. Andy Moore is the executive director and founder of Let's Fix This. Check out their website at letsfixthis.org. You can find out all about their work, their team, how they approach things, and I so appreciate Andy being here tonight, because he gave me some insight about redistricting, reapportionment that I needed, and I hope that you learned something as well. Just a reminder that next Monday is Memorial Day, and so we will not be here with you next Monday evening, but I will be back in 2 weeks. And until then, please take good care of yourselves. Know that you count and that you matter. I look forward to working with you and for you for a long time to come. On behalf of all of us at the Oklahoma Democratic Party and the Hamilton Report, I'm Scott J. Hamilton, thanking you for joining us. Good night.